On this episode of This Week in Linux, we have a ton of stuff to talk about, like Fedora's announcement of the beta for Fedora 30. Linux Journal released their 25th anniversary issue for free to everyone. And UBports announced they were successful in forming their own foundation. We also got a lot of app news this week from GIMP, WPS Office, Strawberry and DeaDBeeF music players, Chef Automation Tool, and more. We're also going to check out some other distro news from Sabayon and Linux Mint. Later in the show, we'll check out some other news from Raspberry Pi, Wayland, Purism, and many more. Then we'll round out the show with some Linux gaming news from Aspyr Media and SuperTuxKart. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with TuxDigital, and this is your weekly source for Linux GNews. This episode of This Week in Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and more. You can get access to this plus access to their world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open-source software, languages, and frameworks. You can get started on DigitalOcean for 2 months for free with a $100 credit by going to do.co/tux. That's do.co/tux. You can use that $100 credit to try out a bunch of their small droplets or some of their big beefy droplets, where in fact you can even try out their 16 gig RAM, 6 virtual CPU droplet that has 6 terabytes of transfer. Again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $100 credit by going to do.co/tux. That's do.co/tux. And thanks again to DigitalOcean for sponsoring This Week in Linux. Up first in the show this week is the beta for Fedora 30 has been released. If you'd like to check out the beta, just keep in mind that it is a beta and it's not the full final release, so there might be some hiccups here and there, but I just wanted to let you know that it is available, and this one is definitely one worth checking out because there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening in this release. So I'm going to cover a few things that I thought was really interesting to cover, but I will talk about the more in depth in a future video or in a future episode when the Fedora 30 is released. But for now, let's talk about the latest update for Fedora 30 has a lot of cool stuff. For DNF performance has been improved. So all DNF repository metadata for Fedora 30 is compressed now with zchunk, in addition to the XE or gzip format or compression algorithms. And this zchunk thing is actually really cool because it allows you to use Delta updates, which means that you're able to update metadata that has changed since the last time you did it, rather than having to download everything, which makes it a lot faster and a lot more seamless to use DNF to manage your system. So that's really cool. They've also updated GNOME to 3.32. So Fedora Workstation Beta includes GNOME 3.32, the latest version of the GNOME desktop, and the GNOME 3.32 features updated visual style, including the changes to the user interface, the icons, and many more things. If you'd like a more in-depth coverage of GNOME 3.32, I've done so on episode 59 of This Week in Linux, so check that out. But also, what I think is really cool, and I wanted to put a little bit extra emphasis on this, is because they're adding more DEs to Fedora. So if you'd like to check out Deepin or Pantheon outside of their respective distros, so if you don't want to use Deepin Linux or you don't want to use Elementary, you could use Deepin DE and Pantheon Desktop inside of Fedora, coming with Fedora 30. So adding those two to the existing ones of like GNOME, KDE Plasma, XFC, etc. There's a lot of options for Fedora users, and I think that is really cool. So if you would like to check out Fedora 30 Beta, I have a link to it in the show notes. Up next in the show, Linux Journal has celebrated their 25th anniversary. So that's amazing. Congratulations to Linux Journal for lasting for 25 years and providing so much content to the Linux community. But they're even going a little bit farther this time, because not only are they doing that, they're going to be doing providing their issue. The 25th anniversary issue is already available right now and is available to everyone for free. All you have to do is sign up for their newsletter to be sent a copy of the issue. The email will include the issue in PDF, MOBI, and EPUB formats. The deep dive this month is Kids in Linux, looking at various ways to help kids get introduced and using Linux. The FOSS project spotlight for this month is Drupal Content Management System. The most important piece in this issue, though, is certainly the 25 years later follow-up with Linus Torvalds, where they interview Linus about all kinds of things. So one of the things I thought was really interesting is his views about social media and why he's not a fan of it. But this is a very interesting perspective, and the interview overall is totally worth reading. So if you want to check it out, they actually covered the Linux Journal in their first year. I'm not sure it was their first issue, but it was definitely their first year where they had an interview with Linus about Linux at the time, which was like, I think it was 1994. Yeah, that's 25 years to it. 1994 is when they did it. And it's a very interesting follow-up because they brought back the person who interviewed Linus back then to also do the interview this time around. So that's pretty cool. If you'd like to check it out, I'll have a link in the show notes to the Linux Journal 25th anniversary issue that you can get for free. Up next in the show, UBports has announced that they have started the UBports Foundation. And this is really cool because it's important to have a foundation because it allows them to get some extra benefits that without having an entity they weren't able to do. But it's also really cool is because the community was able to help facilitate creating this foundation. For example, the Document Foundation, the people who make LibreOffice, were able to give guidance and just overall help the foundation creation. So it's really cool. And they were able to secure the foundation in Berlin, Germany. So this is good because a foundation provides the project benefits such as more structure and more ways to have funding and more merchandising opportunities and a lot of other things. It's really good. So I just want to quickly read about the quotes that they posted on their blog about this particular thing. And they say that, are we able to really make a difference? Yes, definitely. April 5th, 2017, the community took full responsibility for the development and maintenance of Ubuntu Touch mobile operating system. UBports activities led to continuous growth of the community. In an early stage, we became aware that in order to fulfill the growing needs of the community and to support the ambition of sustaining development of Ubuntu Touch and its ecosystem, a formal and legal entity with proper leadership would be required to make our dreams come true. We are very proud and excited to announce that we are about to be granted the status of official foundation. The authorities in Berlin have accepted our plans and the required paperwork, a wonderful milestone in our mission to make Ubuntu Touch a successful alternative mobile operating system, which is really great. I actually use Ubuntu Touch right now. I'm doing that 30-day. I announced it a couple weeks ago, but I haven't really officially announced it on the channel, just in the show. So I might extend the amount of time that I was going to do the challenge for. So 30 days might become 45 days. We'll see. Anyway, I've been using Ubuntu Touch on this phone for a little while, and it is quite good. I like it. So congrats to UBports for getting the foundation started, and I look forward to the future development of Ubuntu Touch. Up next in the show, Sabayon Linux. I don't actually know if it's Sabayon. I think it is, but I don't know. Sabayon? I don't know. Anyway, Sabayon 19.03 has been released. And if you're not familiar, Sabayon is a Gentoo based distribution. They're kind of like a beginner-friendly, user-friendly approach to Gentoo. It allows you to kind of do a stepping stones to get to Gentoo. If you're interested in running Gentoo, Sabayon provides a way to get access to using a Gentoo core, but not having to do everything from scratch like you would normally have to do. Well, not exactly from scratch, but for Gentoo. So it allows you to kind of get used to how Gentoo works in a more easily accessible approach. And then you can later, if you choose to, transition to Gentoo or keep using Sabayon if you want to as well. So there's many options there, and it's really cool that there's distributions that make that possible. Similar to how Manjaro and Tergos, Arco Linux, and things like that allow you to get an easier entry option for Arch Linux, and this Sabayon does the same thing for Gentoo, which is really cool. So this latest version of 19.03, they say that the Sabayon's goal is to give users a wide number of applications ready to use and a self-configured operating system. So with that in mind, 19.03 includes the following features and enhancements. They have a new build infrastructure. They switched to Dracket for interim init RAM FS generation. They've added full disk encryption support, which is really cool. They have actually switched away from the Anaconda installer, which was the Fedora installer, to Calamares, which is a more universally built installer, which is very cool to see. And they also have So they just wanted to make note that they also have support for 32-bit UEFI. So you could use like Intel sticks or compute sticks and etc. They've upgraded their kernel to 4.20, which allows you to have support for really up-to-date hardware like the AMD Radeon 7, that kind of stuff. That's really cool. They also set it up that it now uses Python 3 by default, which is good because Python 3's been out for a while, so it's very good to get that as the setup. A lot of some distros are still using 2.7 for some reason, but there's that. Anyway, they've also done some entropy improvements, including better tracking of automatic dependencies and a new command like equomark. So the AMD DPU enhancements, such as extended Vega support, is a really cool thing because they've also done AMD FreeSync support, because not only do they have the latest kernel, they also have Mesa 19 drivers, and they've said that they're going to be getting the 5.0 or 5 point whatever kernel stack pretty soon. So you'll be able to get better support when that comes out. And they also said that they have NVIDIA FreeSync ready, so G-Sync supported monitors can be enabled with a particular driver for NVIDIA drivers. So that is pretty cool. So I also like the fact that they're working on a new wiki page, which is nice because, so distros not having their own wiki kind of makes it a confusing situation, or not having an up-to-date wiki makes it confusing for users. So it's really cool to see that they're doing that. And they've also started their own Patreon account, so that's pretty cool. If you want to support the distro, you can support them on Patreon. A lot of distros don't have a way to support them, or a lot of projects in general, like open source projects, don't have a way to support those projects, and it's or not an obvious way to support the project, so it's not as good. If you wanted to support it, they making it difficult to do so is kind of an issue that open source has for a while. So it's nice to see when distros introduce a way for you to support them, because if you use their software, you definitely should support them, because otherwise how would they be continuing to make that software, right? So anyway, if you'd like to learn more about Sabayon, or if you're interested in Gen 2 and want to have an easier approach to get to it, then Sabayon is definitely worth checking out. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Up next in the show is Linux Mint 19.2 Tina is on its way, and there's some information about the latest release in the monthly newsletter from Linux Mint, but there's also some other interesting things from this newsletter. And some articles have interpreted in some interesting ways, such as them being depressed or feeling defeated and that kind of thing. And there's some kind of wording in the article, as in the blog post. So it's an interesting perspective of that, but I think that there's more of an underlining issue that needs to be addressed, and I wanted to talk about it in this episode. I also want to let you know that we also talked about it on Destination Linux, episode 116. We talked about this much more in depth with myself, Ryan, and Noah. So if you want to check out that, feel free to do so. I think it's definitely worth checking out. But just to continue on, the article or the blog post was written by Clem, the leader of the Linux Mint project, and some of the comments he said in the blog post started, quote, "I personally haven't enjoyed this development cycle. 2 of our most talented developers have been away. It's not always easy to achieve what we want. Sometimes it's not even easy to define what we want to achieve. We can have doubts. We can work really hard on something for a while and then question it so much we're not even sure if we'll ship it. We can get demotivated, uncertain, and even depressed by negative reactions or interactions. And it can lead to developers stepping away from the project, taking a break, or even leaving for good." And that's definitely an interesting thing, because Linux Mint is in an odd situation where it's one of the most popular distributions. It is one of the most suggested for new users. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who have negative opinions about the project. Now, there is something to specify about negative opinions, negative attitudes, and constructive criticism. Because you can have constructive criticism and also appreciate and respect the work that is being done. So, for example, there are things that I don't necessarily like about Linux Mint. I think that they have some security issues that they're not like insecure, but I think that they do certain things that make it slightly less efficient with security patches, that I would prefer them to fix them, and then I wouldn't have to worry about that kind of an issue. But overall, I do think that Linux Mint is a fantastic distro, And what their goal is also really good. I do think that they make the Cinnamon desktop is a very good desktop. I like the work that they've done into it, and they have a lot of great work that they've overall built. So they were, for example, the apt command that is now available in every Ubuntu-based distribution, that started in 2014. However, Mint built their own in a script form in 2009, I think. I think that's when they did it. So they had it for a very long time before anyone else did. So it's an interesting situation because they are innovative and they are making some good stuff. It's just, there are some things that I wish they would fix, which would make it even not only just a good distribution, but a great distribution. So, yeah. Anyway, another Linux Mint developer, Jason Hicks, added in a Reddit post discussing the high tensions and inability to keep up to the pace. That's the perspective or the perception that people are saying. And he says, in response to this, he says, nope, I'm hiding my project affiliation because that blog post makes me look bad. And this is a question about why he's not on the Linux GitHub anymore, or the Linux Mint GitHub anymore. So it's an interesting situation because all in all, Mint is a successful distribution run by people who have a ton of talent. And at the end of the day, they are human. So they do make mistakes. And it's understandable that they would make mistakes. And if you have an opinion and if you have some criticism, I think they would be open to you sharing it with them. But there's ways to do it that make sense, and there's other ways to be a jerk. And unfortunately, there are some issues with the vast majority of people who use a particular piece of software, or might not even use it, just appreciate it. Don't let the project developers know that you appreciate it. Whereas the people who are negative to it, or even spiteful, are very, very vocal. So it creates this issue where they get a lot of feedback that is negative, and the loudest feedback they get is negative. Now, they probably get more people who are interested, who are appreciative of it in general, but there's this weird situation where the abnormality of someone being negative kind of makes you remember it more. It's kind of like a situation where, as a YouTuber, I get comments, and a podcaster in general, I get comments that are really positive and really helpful, and those are great, and there are vast majority more of those than there are of the negatives. But for some reason, the negatives do have an impact to me. Well, they used to. They don't as much anymore because I realized this issue. So for the most part, I just kind of ignore them. But there are some cases where people aren't really able to ignore them, and it kind of hurts their motivation to continue going. So if you can't donate money to an individual project, but that's understandable. But there are things you can do for free. Like, for example, you could help out in the forums, you could help talking to people, or you could literally just send a tweet, send an email, post on their forum or something, just thanking them for the work that they do, because that in itself is very powerful. And a lot of people who are getting negative feedback, if they get overwhelmed with the positive feedback, the negative feedback is just irrelevant, and it won't even bother them. So if you are using something like Linux Mint or anything else that you really appreciate and you haven't let the developer know, please do so as soon as possible, because I promise you, it will mean a lot to them. So yeah. If you would like to read this newsletter, I have a link to it in the show notes below. Up next in the show is the release of 2.10.10 of GIMP, the GNU image manipulation program. So this is actually just a maintenance update from the previous version of 2.10. There's actually a lot of cool stuff that's in this, though, because, everybody's waiting for 3.0 because there's a lot of stuff coming with that one. GTK3, for example, and some non-destructive stuff that's being added, which is great. But there is a lot of stuff that is added to this one that I thought was really interesting, so I'm going to cover a few of these things, and I'll have a link to the rest of them in the show notes below. But first of all, line art detection and bucket fill tool has been added. This is a new algorithm for painters allowing to fill areas surrounded by line art while trying to leave no unfilled pixels near the lines and closing potential zones, which is really cool because it allows you to do autofill of the paint bucket tool. but not necessarily extend past where you want it to go. So for example, sometimes like in Photoshop, for example, if there's an opening in the line, if there's even a slight bit of opening, the paint will just go everywhere outside of it. So if it's like in the background, it'll go everywhere. Whereas in this has line art detection, making it possible to have more control over that and not go so, chaotic. So that's pretty cool. And this other features is they have a lot of improvements for the transform tools. They've also added a new option called sample merged for the heal tool, and they also fixed the same thing in the clone tool. So what sample merge is, it's an option which allows painting changes on a separate layer to keep the original data intact. So you can still affect, like the heal tool, for example, you can affect the art or the piece of the image without actually affecting the underlying data, which is very, very important for manipulating images without modifying the actual pixels, because that's a non-destructive approach to editing, which is really great to see in GIMP, because that's the biggest complaint there is about GIMP right now for professionals, and that it is very destructive. So adding features like this that are non-destructive is fantastic to see. They've also updated and added parametric brushes, so you can have 32-bit per channel precision, which is really cool. They've also improved the workflow for the eraser brush and the pattern creation. And finally, I want to talk about the new on-canvas layer selection. So a new generic canvas modifier, Alt, then middle-clicking your mouse, allows you to select layers by clicking on a pixel. So the available layers will also be able to be looped through starting the upper one. So if you have let's say you have multiple pixels and you have these and they're stacked, you can actually click on the same pixel and then continue to hold Alt, and then you can navigate through the amount of pixels that are in those layers. So you can just, okay, I want to affect this pixel, but the third layer, so you just do it 3 times. So that's very cool, because it allows you to select layers in a lot faster method than previously, because you'd have to previously find the layer that you want to affect in the layer palette, then choose it manually there, then go back to start editing. Now you can do it really quickly, and it even gives you like a notification of which layer you have selected, or it has been selected in the status bar at the time of doing it. So very, very cool. And they've also fixed some saving and exporting features, as well as the rendering in some layer groups, making it a safer experience where you don't have to worry about if it crashes as you lose your data. So that's fantastic, and I'm looking very much forward to in the next releases for GIMP, especially 3.0, because that has a lot of potential, and I can't wait for that. So if you'd like to try out GIMP 2.10.10, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Up next in the show, DeaDBeeF Music Player 1.8.0 has been released. It's been almost 3 years since the previous release, so there's a lot of stuff that's been changed over the years. And I will also cover a few of these, but I'm not going to I'm going to leave it to you to check out every single one of them, because there's quite a few. And so I'm just going to talk about the ones that are like the highlights. But if you also might notice that the latest version or the previous version is 0.7.2, and this one is 1.8.0. The reason they chose to do the version bump was because they say that there's no compatibility loss or anything, but they simply believe that DeaDBeeF is mature enough to stop using version 0 as the starting point. So instead of 0.8, they decided to do 1.8 instead. So since the release of 0.7.2, they've added support for Opus. They've added a replay gain scanner. They've added proper tracks and cue support, which is nice. They've added UMX module support, and they've also done a lot of hotkey improvements to the user experience. So they've added the ability to open a track properties, add, remove, and toggle songs in the play queue, and move selected tracks up and down with just keyboard shortcuts. So they've made it a lot cleaner experience, and I really appreciate that. So if you are interested in learning more, you can check out DeaDBeeF 1.8.0 in the show notes. Up next in the show is the latest release of 0.5.3 of the music player Strawberry. If you're a longtime listener of the show, then you would know that episode 35, we talked about Strawberry previously, and when it was first announced back in September of last year. And this latest release has some interesting new improvements. So first of all, if you've not heard of it, Strawberry is a fork of Clementine. And Clementine is a music player that's been around for a while. And it actually itself is a fork of Amarok. So Strawberry is a fork of a fork, but that's okay because that's the best thing about open source is that you can do that. And in the case of Clementine, you might be wondering, well, why would you fork Clementine? It's been around for so long. Well, unfortunately, Clementine has not really seen much releasing any new features in a long time. They actually do still work on the code on GitHub occasionally, but it seems to be just people who are submitting code every once in a while and then people merging it in. It's hard to say because for some reason there haven't been any releases for Clementine since 2016. So, it's 3 years or so is kind of a long time for no releases whatsoever, especially while you're still doing development. So that's kind of interesting. But Strawberry has decided to fork it to create their own music player. And at the time of the first time we talked about it, it was an offline-only music player, which was pretty cool because I actually do prefer offline music. But Clementine was really known for having streaming services connected to the player as well. But at the same time, some of the streaming services didn't really work that well. They were kind of clunky and stuff. But Strawberry has decided to bring back the streaming support for various different things, but mainly the one that I think the most interesting is Tidal. I'm not sure if what all they have right now because they haven't really announced the every streaming service that they're going to do, but right now Tidal is the one they're talking about because Tidal is a really high quality streaming service. Like it costs more than Spotify, for example, but it costs more because it has like a lot of high definition audio. So if you prefer, if you're like an audiophile who is really important about music, then Tidal is a better service for you in that case. They also added support for Last.fm, Libra FM, and Listen Brains for scrobbling your, keeping track of what you're listening to and how often you listen to it and that kind of stuff. You don't have to use those things if you don't want to, but you can use them if you want to keep track of that information. So that's pretty cool. They've also got a lot of bug fixes and performance improvements, as well as some new features. So, for example, they have new analyzers called Boom and Rainbox. They've added artist search for music service, the integration with Tidal. They added support for translations. They also set they have a setting to allow automatically saving album covers directly to the album directory, which is nice because it allows you to not have to keep re-downloading the albums. They've also added some more background image options if you like to customize your player. So anyway, if you'd like to check it out, Strawberry Music Player 0.5.3 has a link in the show notes. This episode of This Week in Linux is also sponsored by the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt. It's the shirt I made to celebrate the proliferation of Linux. The concept of the design has Tux blended into the background to convey the message. Even if you aren't aware that Linux is there, it probably is. The shirt is available for shipping from North America and from Europe. If you would like to get it from North America, you can go to tuxdigital.com/LinuxEverywhere, or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/LinuxEverywhereEU for shipping inside of Europe. Last week, I talked about it in the outro that this shirt, North America shipping, wasn't available because of some weird claim that the manufacturer or the distributor had with copyright infringement, even though that's weird, of course, considering I made the shirt. So how do I infringe myself? I don't know. Anyway, that has been solved now, so whichever continent you're on, you can totally check it out. Provided it's North America or Europe. I mean, you can order it from other places in the world, but it costs more to do the shipping there, so there's that. And a special thank you to everyone who supports the show, whether you do so with Patreon or PayPal or purchase this shirt. It's very, 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 very appreciated. I can't really express how much it means to me that people want to support this show and support the content I make. So anyway, let's just get back to the show. Up next in the show is WPS Office 11 for Linux. This latest release adds a lot of new features, but if you haven't heard of WPS Office, WPS Office is it's a very similar interface to Microsoft Office. The WPS team actually says anyone familiar with Microsoft Office will feel right at home with WPS Office. And that makes sense because the interface is very similar, even has a ribbon interface user experience. So it's very, very similar. They've also made it possible to, with the newest release, to have new application skins. They've added easier access to recently opened documents and tabs. They've added ability to open new documents in tabs. They've added some better support for SVG and QR codes. They've made it possible to control the font size in the previews, as well as made it possible to replace fonts inside of documents. So if you import a document and it doesn't have the right font, you could replace the font instead. They've also improved the PDF export feature of the application as well. So if you haven't heard of it and you haven't tried it out, it might be worth trying. There is actually some reports that have said that the Microsoft Office format support in WPS is better than that is offered in LibreOffice. But of course, you'd have to decide for yourself. Like, I've tried both of them, and for my purposes, both of them worked fine in that case as far as those documents support. But you'll have to find out for you if things that you use are available and which one. So anyway, if you'd like to check out WPS Office 11, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Up next in the show is some good news for open source. The automation suite, Chef, has actually been released as open source. In their article, they say it's 100% open always. So if you haven't heard of it, Chef is an automation process to basically allow you to control like an IT infrastructure. So you can have controls over across functional roles to provide environment structure where a business can build and deploy, and also manage, of course, any software they want, basically over any amount of computers they want. So that's the goal of Chef. Chef also says that continuous automation delivers huge ROI benefits across multiple modes of automation, which makes sense. But there was an issue a long time ago, well, until now, that Chef was open core, where it was partially open and also kind of not. Thankfully, though, they've decided that they are going to release the source code for Chef completely and open source it and license it in Apache license. So from the blog post that when they announced this, they say, quote, "We aren't making this change lightly. Over the years, we have experimented with and learned from a variety of different open source, community, and commercial models. In search of the right balance, we believe that this change and the way we have made it best aligns the objectiveness of our communities with our own business objectives. Now we can focus all of our investment and energy on building the best possible products in the best possible way for our community without having to choose between what is proprietary and what is in the commons." They also say that Chef is announcing a new commercial distribution, Chef Enterprise Automation Stack, and that will be licensed and tailored exclusively for commercial customers of Chef. "We will make our distributions freely available for non-commercial use, experimentation, and individuals so anyone can get started with ease." Now that sounds kind of like a contradiction in its own in the blog post itself. Like, how can it be 100% open and then also have a license where you're not allowed to use it for non-commercial use, or you're not allowed to use it unless you pay for it if you're going to use it for commercial use. Having that limitation does kind of make you go, is it 100% open? And technically, yes, it is. There's an interesting loophole that some companies have used in the past, that where you release the binaries as not necessarily proprietary but commercially licensed, and you release the source code as an open license, so that if someone wanted to use the code, they totally could, but they're not necessarily allowed to just take the binaries. So if they wanted to use your software for free and in the open aspects, they totally could, but they would have to compile it and build it themselves and implement and distribute it themselves, or kind of like, deploy it themselves. So it's actually an interesting thing because Red Hat used to have that policy as well. They've kind of changed the way they structure it a little bit, but it is somewhat similar to how it used to be, but it also is a little bit different too, because they have CentOS now under the Red Hat umbrella. But it's interesting because they're saying that the binaries will require a payment for commercial use, but if you're going to use it for non-commercial or personal individual usage, you don't have to pay for the license. The source code will be Apache licensed, so you will have full access to the source code. I mean, if you wanted to compile it yourself, you totally could. But they do have another stipulation that says redistributions of the source code are not allowed to use the chef trademarks. Now, I think this is actually a reasonable approach. You still have the open source aspects. You still have the 100% open source code. The actual source itself is open. But if someone wants you to do the work for them, building the binaries, well, then you could say, if you wanted to deploy our software, you have to pay for a commercial license to do that. Unless you wanted to do it yourself manually and have no support, then I can see how that is a reasonable approach. It doesn't really bother me. That's like, I can understand why some people would be bothered because, it has a little bit of a restriction, but it doesn't really bother me in this case because I don't think it's that, too much to ask of having. If you want someone else to help you build it and deploy everything and have the binaries built for you, then it's kind of reasonable for them to request a commercial fee for that. Especially because this software is used for companies to deploy, not necessarily individual users, even though you totally could if you wanted to with their individual license structure, which is free to use, even the binaries. So even if you just want to use it for yourself, or you just want to use it for your own purposes, or if you're going to do it for a non-commercial usage, then you don't have to worry about it, and the only people who have to worry about it are people who are making money off the software. So I understand that approach, and I'm actually okay with that. So let me know what you think in the comments below, whether you're okay with the structure or not, because I think it would be a really interesting conversation to have. So let me know in the comments below, and if you'd like to check out the blog post from Chef or even just the Chef tools, I have a link to those in the show notes. Up next in the show is the Raspberry Pi mouse and keyboard. More specifically, is an official mouse and keyboard created by the Raspberry Pi Foundation to go along with the Raspberry Pi. And this is pretty cool because if you are a fan of Raspberry Pi, it's nice to see that they're working on a branding approach to their to the Pi itself. They're adding these peripherals that are all match the same kind of design feel, and that's pretty cool. So it's nice to see stuff like that where they're not only just making the hardware, but they're also making a whole nice package. And also, it's a good way to support the companies that you appreciate or that are building these things. So you have the official accessories. You can support the Raspberry Pi Foundation with not only just making the Pi, but also making these other things, like for example their cases as well as these keyboard and mouse. So anyway, they released this branded mouse and keyboard to complement the Raspberry Pi. The mouse is a three-button mouse, so the scroll wheel is also a button, which is very common. But anyways, they also have this nice red and white design that is the approach to the Raspberry Pi's design overall. But if you don't like that particular design, you can also get their black and gray version, which is pretty nice looking too. So they basically look the same, but they have different accent colors. But other than that, it's an interesting approach because of the way that they handle the keyboard. So the first thing that I would be worried about is that there's only a few ports on the Raspberry Pi for USB. So plugging in a mouse and keyboard kind of creates a problem of, well, you're taking up two USB ports, and that can be problematic depending on what you're doing with the Pi. However, this keyboard is actually a really nice keyboard and has an extra nice feature in it. So it's a 78 key laptop type keyboard. So it's a compact keyboard, but they put a lot of effort into it, making it look good and making the quality good. So there's no LED leak or anything. But more importantly, they put extra USB ports on the keyboard itself, like a hub. It's actually a hub. So you plug in with a micro USB from the keyboard to a single port on the Raspberry Pi, and then there are 3 ports on the keyboard itself. So you can plug the mouse into the keyboard and then still have 2 extra ports. So instead of losing 2 ports, you actually gain 1 for sure, while still having the keyboard and mouse connected. So that's a very cool approach, and I think that's a great part of it. They also the prices of these things are pretty cheap too. The keyboard itself is only $17, and the mouse is only $8. So if you like the design and you like that approach, and you want a small, compact approach to having a Raspberry Pi setup, then this could be a good option for you. Another thing about the case that they have, actually there's a lot of cases. You can find hundreds of cases on Amazon or whatever, various different places. But they have their own official case too. And what I like about the official case is that it's designed to have a snap on and off top. So you can actually remove the top and have access to the GPIO pins in the board without having to take the full case off. So that's a very cool feature. And if you are interested in checking that out, I'll have a link to this particular blog post about the Pi's mouse and keyboard in the show notes below. Up next in the show is SPURV. SPURV is an open source initiative from Collabora to run Android apps on Wayland Linux desktops. So they say the way they describe it is you can run Android applications in the same graphical environment as a regular Wayland Linux applications with full 3D acceleration. They say that SPURV was named after the autonomous underwater vehicle that was built in 1957 of the same name that stood for Self-Propelled Underwater Research Vehicle. They say the reason they did so is because it's common to use an Android naming scheme with fish-themed names. I've never seen other fish-named projects for Android other than Goldfish, which is an emulator. But other than that, I don't, whatever. So you say so. Anyway, SPURV is a containerized Android environment that provides an Android target device, a Android HAL to also audio stack, SPURV, a hardware composer to integrate Android Windows into Wayland. It also has DHCP to allow containerized network support and related code to connect these different components together. So it's kind of similar to the way, like, have you ever heard of Anbox? We talked about Anbox on a previous episode of this show, but Anbox is an LXC-based container tool to run Android apps inside of Linux. Now, the difference, SPURV says the difference is how hardware is accessed, and that SPURV is different from other Linux desktop integrations like Anbox because it offers direct hardware access to the Android application. They say this is a choice we made for performance reasons. But there are drawbacks, especially when it comes to security. So I'm not sure, like, because the way that Anbox works is that it's LXC based and uses QEMU in order to create this containering. So it's like a virtualization sort of thing, and it works for the most part pretty well. But it does have a little bit of a performance hit because of that containerization, and it doesn't have direct access to the hardware. So in this approach, like, which one would you prefer? Having a little bit less security, or a little bit better and a little bit better performance, or a little bit less performance and a little bit better security? So I guess that's really a compromise you'd have to pick. And I don't think that SPURV is currently available on Xorg sessions. I think it's only for Wayland right now. And I'm not sure if it's only intended for Wayland or not. I couldn't find any information about that. But it's still an interesting project, and I think it's really great that people are working on this kind of thing, because having some Android apps would be great. For example, if you could have apps for like social media or something like that specifically requires you to use a mobile device, and then this way you could use that app without having to worry about having a mobile device, that would be great. So yeah, anyway, if you'd like to learn more about SPURV, I have a link to the Collabora post on it in the show notes below. Speaking of Wayland, we have some unfortunate news about Wayland. It's not horrible, but it is unfortunate. Derek Foreman, the formerly employee of Samsung for the open source group, has been serving for the release manager of Wayland and the Western compositor for the past number of release cycles, and he's decided to step down from this role. He says, "I no longer have as much time to dedicate to this as I used to, so I think it would be best if someone else could take over managing the releases for Wayland and Weston." So the interesting thing is that people who started Wayland are no longer maintaining Wayland either, and this has been the third. Derek was the third maintainer, and the next person would be the fourth person. I think we already have Simon, who's Simon Sir of Intel, has volunteered to become the next Wayland release manager, but we don't know if that's going to happen or not. But this is an interesting situation because Derek worked for Samsung Research in their open source group. Last October, Samsung announced they would be closing the open source group, but of course they said not to worry because nothing would really change with their contributions. And nothing's going to go away. We're still going to be working on open source. We're still going to be contributing to the ecosystem and all that good stuff. In fact, they even said in an article in October of last year, their response to the community's response was not very positive for this news. And Samsung decided to try to cool that with this statement, saying that Samsung's Research America's open source group has helped guide the company in effective consumption, collaboration, and development of open source software since its formation in 2013. We have not shut down the OSG, but the group has recently been restructured. While we do not comment on personnel matters, what we can say that we remain committed to open source software research. So this was to say that don't worry, it's not a big deal. We're still going to be doing stuff. And now the developers who were working on things upstream in big ways like Release Manager for Wayland were absolutely let go and therefore didn't have time to devote to it anymore. And so the statement that there's nothing to worry about, there's nothing changing, is a massive lie, because they did get rid of the restructuring is a nice way of saying we're lying to you. But anyway, so many of the upstream developers employed by Samsung's OSG is no longer there. It's no longer a part of Samsung. And in many cases, they're not able to continue working on the projects they were working on because of it. Phoronix reports that since the closure of the OSG, for Wayland in particular, Samsung's public contributions to Wayland Weston have dried up completely. So, yeah, just to point out that I don't, this is a negative thing, and I normally don't talk about massively negative topics on this show. But, when somebody does this kind of thing and it's negative to a potentially important project like Wayland, I do want to point out that, the absurdity of their comments about how they're still trying to help open source and they still care and they remain committed or whatever. Sure you do. So from one company that is a punk to open source to two companies that are pals of open source, and that is Purism and Private Internet Access. So Purism has announced recently their partnership with Private Internet Access, and they say that PIA's popular VPN platform will be fully integrated into Purism's software and hardware offerings for unprecedented security and privacy protection. They also go on to say, quote, by combining its signature VPN capabilities with Purism, leading secure hardware and software products, the two will create a first-of-its-kind bundle for users to set up a privacy-protecting and secure environment out of the box. So Purism plans to include the Private Internet Access VPN by default in the Librem 5 phone, as well as within PureOS for its Librem 13 and Librem 15 laptops. They also have announced, Purism has announced that they're going to do upgrades to the hardware in the Purism laptops to increase the RAM to up to 32 gigs, which is really cool. So this is pretty cool. If you haven't heard of it, Private Internet Access is a VPN or a virtual private network that allows you to be secured and be private on the internet. And the best thing about it is that Private Internet Access has proven multiple times that they do not keep logs or even make logs in the first place of what people do on the VPN. This is it's a way to be private and anonymous through their VPN service. And they've actually been taken to court multiple times or subpoenaed multiple times from the U.S. government to get logs from the users, but they don't have logs, so there's nothing to get. So anyway, that's just a great thing. So if you actually are not aware, a VPN allows you to do multiple things. If you happen to be region locked to the content in various different platforms, you could use a VPN to bypass that. Or you could just want to be careful about privacy. Like, for example, if you go to a public Wi-Fi at like a coffee shop, you should definitely be using a VPN, not their direct Wi-Fi, because that would be not a good idea. All kinds of stuff could be on that network. So, yeah, use a VPN there if you do that. But anyway, I do think that this is pretty cool, and I do like Private Internet Access. And if you are interested in checking out Private Internet Access, because if you don't have a Purism device, you could still use Private Internet Access VPN. You just have to sign up for their service, and install it into your computer or into your device or whatever, and totally can get started with it now. And if you do decide to get started with it, you can check out the affiliate link by going to tuxdigital.com/PIA. That's tuxdigital.com/PIA to sign up for private internet access. And if you use that URL, it will give a small commission to the Tux Digital channel and to this show, letting them know that we sent you there, and we're very appreciative because you'd be able to not only get a great VPN, but you'd also be supporting the Tux Digital channel. So thank you if you do so, and I do highly suggest checking out them because having a VPN is very useful. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about this particular partnership or Purism or private internet access, I'll have a link to all that in the show notes. So we're going to round this episode out with some Linux gaming news. And first up, we're going to talk about the latest confirmation from Aspyr Media about the DLC, the Ultra HD DLC for Borderlands is coming to Linux. So the recently released free DLC for Borderlands 2 and Borderlands, the pre-sequel, which adds a lot of multiple graphical upgrades and all kinds of stuff, will be supported on the Linux versions that were ported by Aspyr Media. This is really cool because, for example, what comes is remastered 4K environment textures, 4K characters and vehicles, 4K weapon meshes, improved anti-aliasing implementation, which includes improved edgeline implementation. This includes improved inkline definition, so the design of the characters and everything is just a nice, better framing and outline around the character models. Improved screen space ambient occlusion, which basically is a method for realistic ambient lighting. They've also improved higher resolution dynamic shadows, which makes it have a higher quality and smoothness of shadows, especially during movement. So it's just a nice overall enhancement package for Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel. And it's really cool that they're going to be supporting this update because I'm a big fan of Borderlands series. It's an amazingly ridiculous and funny and awesome game series, and Borderlands 2 specifically has one of the best villains ever. Top 5 ever best villains. Not even just games. It's such a good villain. Anyway, so that's the good news. The potential bad news is we don't really know for sure, but based on the likelihood, it's not likely. But Borderlands 3 has been announced, and it looks amazing, and it looks great, and I want to play it. But we don't have any word about it being supported for Linux because Gearbox themselves don't support Linux, so we can't really rely on them. And they recently did the horrible exclusive deal with the Epic Store that I talked about in a previous episode, where Epic is terrible and that they're doing exclusive nonsense with games that are already existing. And they're doing that with Borderlands 3 too, which is only going to be for a couple months or so, but still pretty annoying because it's one of the games that I really want. And this means it's very unlikely that Linux will get it anytime soon if it does. But Aspyr Media has not confirmed whether or not they're going to be porting Borderlands 3 to the platform. And I'm just saying that I think it would be amazing if they were to do that. It's one of the most anticipated games for me in a long time. And just saying, if you would like to tweet them and request that they port the game to Linux, I will have a link to tweet them in the show notes and the video description. So if you'd like to do that and help me convince them, I will be sending a tweet. You can retweet what I sent, or you could just send your own if you wanted to. But I think if we can somehow get enough people to convince them that there are people who want to have this game and are willing to pay for it, I think it'd be great, and maybe they'll listen. Anyway, hopefully so. But if you'd like to check out the DLC for the Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, that will be coming fairly soon. I'm not really sure exactly when. They haven't said so, but hopefully pretty soon. Anyway, I have a link to the post on Gaming on Linux about this, as well as the games themselves if you're interested, and the tweet to let them know that we want Borderlands 3 in the show notes. Well, not Borderlands 3 in the show notes, but the link will be in the show notes. Right. That makes sense. And finally this week is the latest announcement from SuperTuxKart. 0.10 release candidate is now available. Now, there's a couple things I want to talk about before we get to the big news. If you have listened to the show for a while, we actually talked about the big news previously on the beta version that was released, but we're going to save the best for last if you're new to the show. So, the old mansion track has been replaced with a new upgraded Raven Bridge mansion track, which looks much nicer. They've actually implemented the Black Forest add-on map, which was a community-created map, and has now become an official SuperTuxKart tracks, part of the track set, which is really cool. But, by far, the most important thing that it's been needed for a very long time is that networked multiplayer is now available and ready for general use. So you can test it out without using a beta. You could just use the this version is a release candidate, so it's not technically a release and is not technically ready, but it is definitely ready for testing. For basically anybody can test it out without having to worry about doing all the extra stuff that you would do with the beta. But anyway, so it's really cool because the multiplayer games allow you to play with your friends over Wi-Fi and, most importantly, over the internet. So you can now play SuperTuxKart over the internet with your friends, and it's awesome. So I'm a big fan of this game because it's silly. It's a kind of a combination of Mario Kart plus the mascots of the open source and free software world, like the GIMP character. You can get the Tux, for example, the Linux mascot, SuperTuxKart. That's where the name comes from. Anyway, that's also, by the way, if you're not aware, that's where TuxDigital comes from. But again, moving back to the topic, the SuperTuxKart is a really fun game, but the only thing it was missing was the ability to play your friends online. And now that you can do that, it opens a whole new world of potential for this game. And it also is going to make it a game that we're going to play as a community pretty soon to celebrate this release. So if you would like to, be sure to join the TuxDigital Discord server by going to tuxdigital.com/discord, and also I'll be announcing at both places the Telegram group, tuxdigital.com/telegram, to be notified when we're going to do this. It'll be sometime this week. I haven't decided exactly when, but sometime this week we're going to do a community race, I guess, gauntlet, I don't know, of SuperTuxKart online, which is awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I actually did get a chance to play with it before with me and Ryan from Destination Linux, as well as some others tried it out. And it's pretty fun. It works quite well. So if you are interested, you should definitely check it out. And be sure to sign up, or not sign up, but join those groups and the Discord server to be notified we're going to do it. I'm also going to be posting a video on this channel about it when we do the community gaming, and also doing on Twitter and Mastodon and those kinds of places as well. So you're not going to be left out if you don't join the Discord or Telegram groups, but if you would like to, the Discord is more importantly the available for the conversation, because I will probably stream the games, and you will need to join the Discord server voice channel in order to participate in. Well, you can participate in the game regardless, but participating in the game's voice and the extreme itself and the overall experience, you need to be a part of the Discord server for that. So, if you would like to check it out, which I suggest you do, SuperTuxKart 0.10 release candidate. We'll have a link in the show notes. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the TuxDigital channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via PayPal, Patreon, and many more. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/LinuxEverywhere. Or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/LinuxEverywhereEU for shipping inside of Europe. We also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find places like Amazon, private internet access, etc. by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. If you'd like to submit some good news to the show, then visit the subreddit by going to thisweekinlinux.reddit.com. If you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I'm a co-host of that show. You can also check out the next episode of Floss Weekly from the Twit Network, as I'll be co-hosting the episode 525 of Floss Weekly. And just a reminder, the show is live usually every Saturday, so join us in the live chat room to discuss all the latest Linux GNews each week. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell with TuxDigital, and as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.